Tai Tuivasa seems to be in pretty good spirits following his brutal knockout loss at UFC Orlando on December 3rd at the Amway Center in Orlando, Florida. Sergei Pavlovich dismantled Bam Bam in less than a minute and claimed his fifth straight first-round stoppage victory. Tuivasa announced after the fight that he just got done tonight and needed to spend time with his family. Stay tuned while we dive right in and tell you all about what went down. First things first, here's a recap of that 54-second knockout. On the main card of UFC Orlando this past weekend, we witnessed a battle of heavyweight knockout artists. When Tai Tuivasa met the surging Sergei Pavlovich, he was looking to rebound from a tough loss to Cyril Gane. Pavlovich stopped Tai Tuivasa in less than a minute in a decisive victory at UFC Orlando. From the first exchange, the heavy-handed Russian was aiming for the finish, cracking Tuivasa with a hard shot that rattled the always entertaining Australian brawler. Pavlovich just poured it on as he continued punching Tuivasa while remaining wary of the power his opponent could produce in return. Pavlovich eventually landed a jab in Tuivasa's already bloodied face, knocking him to the canvas for the second time in the fight before unloading a few more punches that led to the finish. This is Pavlovich's fifth straight victory and fifth consecutive knockout in the UFC. Pavlovich said he had to do a lot of work to get here and a lot of work to get these results, adding that he hopes he gets a bonus this time. The Russian MMA fighter explained how, before the fight, he dissected his opponent and all his different disciplines, since this was a very important fight for his career. Pavlovich delivered an incredible performance, essentially walking down Tuivasa and injuring him without fear of retaliation. Many heavyweights attempted the same strategy, but Tuivasa made them pay dearly. This time, it was Pavlovich who injured Tuivasa, and he just kept hammering away until he scored an impressive knockout. The victory undoubtedly moves Pavlovich one step closer to title contention, with very few options remaining before he calls for a rematch with heavyweight champion Francis Ngannou. Moving on, here's what Tuivasa had to say about his loss. Tuivasa wrote about his UFC Orlando loss on social media, saying he got done. The Aussie MMA fighter also sent big love to his team, thanking them for all they do and congratulating Pavlovich for his win. Tuivasa took his loss in stride, admitting that the Russian fighter rocked him hard, because of which he couldn't manage to recover. At the end of his post, Tuivasa thanked the Orlando crowd and said that it was time for him to go home to see his family, but that he would be back again to do his shui ritual. Up next, Tai Tuivasa's loss thankfully saved us from seeing his post-fight ritual. Tuivasa has suffered back-to-back losses and has been stopped in both of them, including this month. Fortunately, the Australian MMA fighter has no plans to compete at UFC 284 in Perth, Australia. Instead, he told UFC Orlando media that he'd rather be drunk in the stands. For what it's worth, Tuivasa, who frequently celebrates with fans after fights, refused to accept the fans' beers after his most recent defeat, which makes sense in more ways than one. We've seen worse post-fight celebrations, such as BJ Penn licking Diego Sanchez's blood from his UFC gloves, but that doesn't make the shui any easier to swallow. Moving on, we weren't entirely expecting the fight to go this way. Pavlovich was defeated in his UFC debut by Alistair Overeem, but he has since looked like a destroyer. He defeated Derek Lewis in under a minute earlier this year. Even after what he did to the Black Beast, we were still leaning toward Tuivasa in this matchup. We were sorely mistaken. In fact, the fight resembled a Lewis fight almost exactly. In the first minute, Pavlovich pushed forward and overwhelmed Tuivasa. Tuivasa was hurt up against the fence as a result of his huge power and accurate shots. He landed the shots that knocked Tuivasa out with precision. After a few more shots, the fight was stopped, giving Pavlovich a huge victory at UFC Orlando. Next, what's next for Sergei Pavlovich? This is a huge victory for Sergei Pavlovich, and make no mistake, he's a heavyweight contender. He's near the top of the division and is likely one victory away from challenging for the heavyweight title. So how hard will he have to fight to get there? There's a perfect opponent for him who would create tremendous intrigue. The promotion is planning a heavyweight title fight between Jon Jones and Francis Ngannou at UFC 185 in March. We believe the fight will take place unless something changes. We believe Pavlovich should be included on the same card. Cyril Gane, the former interim champion, should be his opponent. Pavlovich's striking and power against Gane's striking and footwork would be spectacular, and it would be the ideal title eliminator. This, in our opinion, is the direction the UFC will take. Curtis Blades, we're sorry. Now, let's take a look at some other highlights of UFC Orlando. The Ultimate Fighting Championship's previous event, the dreadful UFC Fight Night 215 was the weakest in Fight Night history, so UFC on ESPN 42 was a welcome reprieve. UFC Orlando had 7 fights better than last week's Ion Cutelaba Kennedy Nzechukwu main event. The entire main card plus Emily Ducote versus Angela Hill. Stephen Thompson, a perennial contender and one of the greatest strikers in MMA history, faced the endlessly dynamic and entertaining Kevin Holland in the main event. Thompson's legendary career may be ending, as he had lost 2 consecutive fights before the event and is 39 years old. Those defeats, however, had come to top names in Gilbert Burns and Bilal Muhammad, both of whom had triumphed through their grappling. Holland, too, had attempted to right the ship. He had won his first 2 fights as a welterweight, knocking out Alex Oliveira and then submitting Tim Means via Bravo choke before being submitted himself in the first round by Khamzat Chimaev via Bravo choke. As a result, the fans were treated to a true treat as well as one of the best battles of the year. Thompson and Holland traded massive strikes for 4 rounds in a row. In the 4th round, the nearly 40-year-old Wonder Boy really unloaded as Holland fought on with a badly injured hand, relying on his iron chin to weather one flush bomb after another. His corner, however, wisely called the contest off before the final stanza. Moving on, the co-main was just as thrilling. Rafael dos Anjos, a former UFC lightweight champion, moved up to welterweight for the 2nd time in the co-main event after being knocked out by Rafael Fiziev. At 38 years old, this was dos Anjos' final fight, and he faced another longtime veteran in 33-year-old Brian Barberena, who was riding an improbable 3-fight winning streak that included victories over 40-year-olds Matt Brown and Robbie Lawler. Dos Anjos wisely relied on his grappling to take down Barberena and work for submissions, eventually obtaining a rear naked choke late in round 2. Dos Anjos set a new UFC record for most time spent in the octagon with a victory and his 21st win in the organization. Matthias Nicolau and Matt Schnell squared off in an important flyweight contender bout. Nicolau improved to 4-0 in the UFC with a stunning overhand right behind Schnell's ear in round 2. Up next, here are some matchup suggestions after UFC Orlando. Unlike the last UFC event, this time there are a bunch of interesting matchups that pretty much suggest themselves. First up, Stephen Thompson versus Rafael dos Anjos. Let's be honest about this. Both men have a lot of talent left in them, but neither is a serious contender for the welterweight title, so why not pit 2 legends against each other in what should be an entertaining match? Up next, Kevin Holland versus Vicente Luque. Whatever you think of Kevin Holland's fight IQ or the fact that he's lost 2 in a row, he always puts on an amazing show for the crowd. Why not pit him against another perennial crowd pleaser, Vicente Luque, in what could be the most incredible slugfest of any year? Moving on, we have Matheus Nicolau versus Alexandre Pantoja. Prior to his massive knockout of Schnell, Nicolau was the number 2 contender and had gone undefeated since his return to the UFC. Pantoja is the number 2 contender riding a 3-fight winning streak and appears to be in his prime at 32. Their clash would not only be a ferocious battle in the striking and grappling arenas, but also an excellent way to determine the next flyweight contender. Lastly, Sergei Pavlovich versus Cyril Gane. With Francis Ngannou on the mend and possibly eyeing a mega fight against John Jones, why not have Pavlovich fight Gane for the interim heavyweight title? It would be an epic battle, pitting Pavlovich's ferocious firepower against Gane's outstanding movement, agility, and technique. That's a wrap for this video. Which one of these matchups are you looking forward to the most? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.